Hello, welcome to my show. My name is Shankar. I consider myself a blue collar mathematician. What does it mean? It means that I like tinkering with problems, big and small, and I'm also a person of simple tastes, and I like working with my hands. This summer, I made a raised garden bed with pieces of my son's old bed, and that was a big deal for me. I'm very proud of myself. Anyway, so for today's talk, here is what we'll talk about. You might have heard on the news lately the claim made that our cases are more because we're doing more testing, and also that when you look at deaths as a proportion of cases, also called the mortality rate, that we are doing very well. Um, so we'll talk about these two questions. But first, I want to say thanks to Howard University. Um, it's a fantastic place, and I'm very honored and grateful to be working here. Have a lot of great colleagues and wonderful students. But all of this is my own opinion. It's my personal project, and any mistakes are my own responsibility. And if you have any comments, constructive comments, please write to this email address, and hopefully I can respond. All right. Um, so um, I said I talk politics and stuff. I hope to make videos about all kinds of things, but as I said, for this talk, I was really intrigued by these questions. As a mathematician, uh, I thought I can say something about it. It's just basic arithmetic and statistics. I will keep it very simple and brief because I know from experience that when it comes to teaching math, the shorter it is and the simpler it is, the easier it is for people to pay attention. So we'll keep it as simple as possible. First, let's look at the numbers. These are the total tests, and as you can see, the United States is certainly doing well. And but if you look at Germany and South Korea, which have been the most successful in controlling the epidemic, their numbers are relatively low. By the way, this is per 1,000. It's not the total number of cases for the whole country, but as a fraction of every 1,000 people. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to compare different countries with populations. India has 1 billion people, and Germany has tens of millions. So it really doesn't make sense to compare the whole population. And we will do that with other things too. We will look at the cases and deaths for, um, say, 100,000 people in each country. So if you look at these, you see that their numbers are a little bit smaller. So just because you're doing a lot of tests doesn't mean uh, it's a good. I mean, it is a good thing that we are doing a lot of tests, but it's not the whole story. And in fact, they're saying that if we can do a lot of quick tests, a lot of these quick tests, they can replace, I mean, not replace, but they can play a role of the vaccine and bring this whole thing under control. Uh, so, just a simple way to think about it. As I said, the question is, are cases more because testing is more? Well, suppose a country had 1 million people and none of them have the virus. So if you do 1 million tests, you will find zero cases, right? So um, just because we are finding doing a lot of tests doesn't mean that the infection is under control. In fact, we need to do more in order to bring the infection under control. And the main number here to look at is the positivity rate. And this really tells you what fraction of the population is infected. Of course, there is one caveat, which is that um, when you do the tests, in some countries, it's done for a lot of people, including people who may not show any symptoms. In other countries, especially like in the US, you might have heard that even people with symptoms, sometimes they find it hard to get a test, and because the hospitals have so many requests, and they can only do so many tests, and they ask that people have a certain uh, condition before they can be tested. So, um, but still, when you look at the number of positive cases out of all the tests done, that gives you a pretty good idea of how widespread the disease is. So, going back to this example, so if you do 1 million tests, but the country has no infection, then you have zero positivity. So that tells you that um, what the positivity rate means. It means it gives you a good idea of how much the disease has spread. Again, it depends on various things. So it's not the whole story. As I said, I'm trying to make it simple, but it does give you a good idea of how prevalent the disease is in a country. And as you can see from this picture, um, in the beginning, so this the blue numbers are from the early days of the um, virus, and the orange numbers are from today. Um, well, just last week, and you can see that the positivity rate has risen in the US. That means that the disease is spreading more. And same thing here for India and Ghana. These countries, you can see it's really worrisome. It's spreading very fast. Hopefully, it doesn't explode. The problem with the spread of diseases like this virus disease is that the growth is exponential, and there are a lot of good videos talking about how exponential growth works. You think for a while it's going slow, but suddenly it just explodes. And so that's why it is so important to control it in the beginning. Now, you see, on the other hand, if you look at South Korea and Germany, it never got beyond like 3%, although in Italy, did get uh, very high, even in the beginning. And the reason is that they did a lot of testing and tracing and isolating and all that in the very beginning, even when there were very few cases in South Korea and Germany. All right. So I hope that gives you some idea about the first question. Um, Now let's move on to the next question. Which should we pay attention more? Should we pay more attention to deaths as a proportion of cases? So this is also called the mortality rate, or should we pay more attention to deaths as a proportion of the population? Now, first let us look at the total number of deaths. Um, we'll come to the question in the next slide. So you see that we have over 160,000 people dead, and that is a very tragic number. Certainly, there's nobody coming close, although Brazil is um, getting bad really quickly, and India, as we saw, is also it's getting worse there. So these are not just numbers; they are people. So it is quite tragic, and so there's this number here is something very concerning, um, and there is no denying of that. Okay, so now we come to this question. So these are the numbers for the deaths um, as a proportion of the population. Again, we look at deaths per 100,000 because it doesn't make sense to compare the deaths per population for um, different countries with very big different sizes of population. And here is the deaths as a proportion of cases, so the mortality rate. And the picture here is a little more muddled. There are a lot of factors involved here. As you can see, Italy, France, Spain, and the UK, they have very high numbers of deaths as a proportion of the population. Uh, US is right here, it's about 50 per 100,000. And Spain, UK, and Italy are even worse. And so there are a number of complicating factors. One thing is that Italy, at least for sure, has a lot of older people, and as you know, older people um, tend to be affected more, and they are in more of danger uh, from this virus. And and then the other thing is that um, these things happen. Most of the deaths in these countries happen in the beginning, in March and April. You may remember how it spread from Italy and France and UK, and then from after that it came to the US. And New York City was kind of hit around the same time. And at that time, people were still learning about the virus and figuring out ways to treat it. So um, now they have more or less under control. They have the virus more or less under control, and they imposed strict lockdowns as they did in New York State. And now their numbers are smaller, as you saw in the previous slide. So there are a lot of complicating factors here. Now, on the other hand, if you look at India, it has over a billion people, and the deaths per 100,000 is still very small, although it may get bigger. Peru and Chile and Mexico are also doing poorly. On the other hand, if you look at Germany, which is in Europe, which is in contact, I mean, people come in from all these countries to Germany also. So they were also susceptible to the virus, but their numbers are much smaller. Um, so um, different countries have dealt with it in different ways with different amount of success, varying amount of success. Now, if you look at deaths per cases, certainly, so the mortality rate certainly is much lower here, and again, that could be due to a lot of different factors. As I just mentioned, um, once it passed from New York City, now it is spreading in the southern and the Midwestern states. So, the spread in the U.S. has not been happening evenly, and that could be one reason. And also, um, in the beginning stages, that does, as you can see here, um, all of these countries, they were affected in the beginning, and so the mortality was higher because at that time people were still trying to figure it out. On the other hand, if you look at Germany, its mortality rate is still higher than the US. So, but we know Germany has done really well in controlling the virus. So, um, it's not clear that just because the mortality rate is low in the US, that we are doing much better than everybody else. Some countries are doing worse, some countries are doing much better. All right. Um, so I hope I gave you some idea um, about the numbers. Now let's do another thought experiment to understand this question. Suppose country A tests 50,000 people, and country B tests 10,000 people, and they both have 100,000 people. So this is testing more, and here testing less. In country A, 3,000 people test positive. So if you look at um, the case deaths per cases, the ratio here is 90 divided by 3,000. So this comes to about 3% multiplied by 100. It's a little math there. In B, you have 100 people testing positive and 10 people die. So that will be 10 out of 100. Of course, that is 10%. So you can see A is doing better in terms of the um, mortality rate. But you can see from the big picture that clearly the spread of the virus is much more in country A. If you look at the positivity, you have 100 out of 10,000. Um, so that's just 1%. And so this is in B. In A, you have 3,000 out of 50,000. So this will be um, about 6%. So you see that the positivity is much higher for A, and the mortality rate is smaller for A, and the deaths um, per 100K, well, there's 100,000 people, so the deaths per 100K is um, 90 in A and 10 in B. So, so just because the mortality rate is lower, which is 3%, doesn't mean that. So this is the deaths per cases, right? Mortality rate. Just because the deaths per cases is lower doesn't mean that it's much better in A. In fact, you can see from the positivity that the disease has spread more in A, um, and and it has more deaths per 100K. So, and also notice that A tests more people, but um, that by itself, I mean, it's a good thing they're testing more people, but that by itself doesn't tell you how well the virus is under control. All right, so I hope um, I kept it simple, and I hope it helped to understand this question. Um, but as I said, there are a lot of complicating factors, so things are not things in real life. As always, things are a little more complicated, and we really have to look at the whole picture to really understand what is going on and take into account all sorts of factors. So anyway, I hope it helped you understand it a little better. And please, if you have any comments or questions, as long as they are constructive, I will try to respond. Please write to this address. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.